You know, there is a specific sound that a cedar post makes when it snaps. A dry, hollow crack that echoes right in the pit of your stomach. And on a Tuesday morning, just as the sun was burning the mist off the hayfields, that sound tore through my property like a gunshot. I didn't even have to look out the window to know what it was, because I'd heard it 3 times in the last month, followed immediately by the arrogant crunch of all-terrain tires on my gravel, and the fading hum of a turbocharged engine. It was Victoria Vance, the self-appointed Empress of Serenity Heights, the new luxury subdivision that had popped up on the other side of the ridge like a bad rash. And she was once again treating my private ranch road like her personal express lane to the highway. To her, my private property sign wasn't a legal boundary. It was just a suggestion, a flimsy piece of wood that was inconveniencing her morning commute to Pilates. And apparently, she decided the best way to deal with an inconvenience was to run it over. With a 6,000-pound white Range Rover, I'm weary just thinking about it. But let me back up a second. My name is Caleb Thornton, and I've owned the Ironwood Ranch for nearly 20 years. Bought it with money I saved working oil rigs in the Gulf, clearing the brush with my own 2 hands, grading that dirt road with an old rented bulldozer until my kidneys felt like they'd been put through a meat grinder. That road is the artery of my land, winding 2 miles from the main highway back to my barn, flanking a steep creek bed and lined with ancient oaks that I fought to keep alive. Through droughts and freezes, for 2 decades, the only traffic on that dirt was my truck, the feed delivery guy, and the occasional lost armadillo. It was quiet, it was dusty, and it was mine. Then came Serenity Heights, a sprawling collection of McMansions built by developers who cared more about square footage than water tables. And with them came Victoria Vance, the HOA president who ruled her cul-de-sacs with an iron fist and a clipboard. I guess the main exit of their subdivision got clogged up with school buses in the mornings, or maybe the construction traffic was too slow for her liking, because one day she spotted my service gate, an old, rusted thing connecting the back of their property to my land, and decided she'd found a loophole. The first time she cut through, I was out mending a fence, and I watched, jaw on the floor, as this pristine white SUV blasted past me, kicking up a cloud of dust so thick I was coughing for 5 minutes. She didn't wave, didn't slow down, just stared straight ahead behind designer sunglasses like I was part of the scenery, just a peasant in the background of her very important life. I tried to be neighborly at first. I really did. I parked my truck at the gate the next day and waited for her. When she rolled up at 7:45 a.m. sharp, tapping her manicured nails on the steering wheel, I walked up and motioned for her to roll down the window. She lowered it maybe 2 inches, letting out a blast of air conditioning that smelled like vanilla and new leather, and said, "Is there a problem?" I'm in a bit of a rush. I tipped my hat and said, "Ma'am, this is a private ranch road. It's not for through traffic. You're trespassing on working agricultural land." She just looked at me, tilted her head like she was explaining quantum physics to a toddler, and said, "Oh, don't be silly, we're neighbors. This connects to the county road, doesn't it? It's a shared easement." I checked the maps, and before I could tell her that her maps were wrong, she rolled the window up and drove around my truck, actually driving over my winter wheat to get past me. That was the moment the fuse was lit. But the explosion didn't happen until the letters started coming. A week after our little chat, I found a heavy, cream-colored envelope in my mailbox, stamped with the Serenity Heights Cresta gold pine tree that looked nothing like any tree native to this part of Texas. Inside was a letter, not from a lawyer, but from the HOA board, informing me that due to traffic congestion and community safety, the board had voted, mind you, to designate my ranch road as an auxiliary emergency and convenience route. They had used a font that looked suspiciously like Comic Sans for the body text, which somehow made the threat even more insulting, and ended it with a smiley face next to Victoria's signature. They weren't asking. They were telling me that my land was now their shortcut, claiming some phantom community necessity that existed only in their entitled heads. I laughed it off at first, thinking they were delusional, but then the harassment escalated. I'd come home to find HOA security patrols, rent-a-cops, and golf carts parked on my land, measuring the width of the road. I found surveyor's stakes with orange ribbons pounded into my pasture, marking out a widening zone. When I pulled them up and threw them back over the fence, Victoria sent me a bill for destruction of community property totaling $500. It was madness, absolute lunacy. But they were betting on the fact that I was just one tired rancher who wouldn't have the money or the energy to fight a collective of wealthy suburbanites. But the breaking point, the moment that turned me from a frustrated neighbor into a man planning a tactical strike, happened on a Tuesday. I had put up a brand new gate, a heavy steel one, painted bright red with reflective tape and a sign that read "Private Road, Nitrogen Monoxide Trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted." I spent 4 hours welding that thing, setting the posts deep in concrete. The next morning, I woke up to that sickening crack. I ran out to the porch just in time to see Victoria's SUV, pushing my brand new gate flat onto the ground, her bumper guard acting like a battering ram. She had hit it with enough speed to snap the latch and bend the steel. And she didn't even tap her brakes. She just kept going, speeding off toward the highway, leaving my hard work twisted in the dust. I stood there in my boots, coffee mug trembling in my hand, not from fear, but from a rage so cold it felt like ice water in my veins. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. This was an invasion. She had destroyed my property, disrespected my home, and laughed in my face, all because she wanted to save 10 minutes on her drive to Starbucks. I realized then that signs wouldn't stop her. Fences wouldn't stop her. The only thing that would stop a woman like Victoria Vance was the laws of physics. I walked back into the house, picked up the phone, and called my buddy Earl. Earl runs an excavation business 2 towns over. The kind of guy who can dig a swimming pool or a grave with equal precision, and not ask too many questions. "Earl," I said, "I got a drainage problem on the North Road, serious erosion. I need to put in a trench, a big one, for water management." Earl paused. I could hear him lighting a cigarette on the other end, and he chuckled, a low, gravelly sound. "This drainage problem wouldn't happen to be shaped like a white Range Rover, would it?" "It might be," I said. "How soon can you get the backhoe out here?" We started digging that evening, waiting until the sun went down so the eyes from the subdivision wouldn't see us. We picked a spot right after a blind curve, a place where the road dips naturally and the trees crowd in close, creating a tunnel of shadows. It was the perfect ambush point. We dug a trench across the entire width of the road, about 4 feet deep and 6 feet wide to jump, to deep to crawl out of. It wasn't a trap, legally speaking. It was a soil conservation project. I intended to put in a culvert, eventually. But for now, it was just a gaping maw in the earth. To be absolutely sure I was covered, I put up signs. Not just 1, but 3. Construction ahead, road closed, and danger, open trench. I placed them strategically, spaced out so you'd have to be blind or willfully ignorant to miss them. But I knew Victoria. I knew she didn't read signs. She saw obstacles as challenges to her authority. We finished around 2 a.m. The smell of fresh diesel and turned earth hanging heavy in the cool night air. Earl wiped his brow, looked at the gaping hole, and grinned. "That's a hell of a hole, Caleb. You think she's gonna stop?" I looked at the dark tracks leading up to the curve and shook my head. "Earl, she thinks she owns the world. She's not gonna stop until the world stops her." We covered the trench lightly with a sheet of thin plywood and scattered loose dirt and hay over it. Not to hide it completely, the signs were there, but to make it look like just a patch of rough road. The kind she usually powered over without a second thought. It was bait. It was a test. If she slowed down, if she paid attention, she'd see the danger. If she drove with the arrogance she'd shown for months, well, gravity would do the rest. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I sat on the porch with my dog, Buster, watching the stars fade and the sky turn that bruised purple color before dawn. I drank coffee that tasted like battery acid and waited. At 7:30 a.m., the birds stopped singing. I heard at first the aggressive thump-thump of bass from a high-end stereo system, then the whine of the engine. She was early. I grabbed my binoculars and trained them on the curve. Through the lenses, I saw the white flash of the Range Rover cresting the hill. She was moving fast, faster than usual. probably angry that I hadn't fixed the gate she broke yesterday. She blew past the first sign. She blew past the second sign. She didn't even tap her brakes. I saw her silhouette in the driver's seat, phone pressed to her ear, one hand on the wheel, head turned slightly as if she was yelling at someone. She hit the curve doing at least 40. The plywood covering the trench didn't even have time to groan. The front wheels of that luxury tank hit the false floor, and for a split second, the car looked like it was floating, suspended in the air by nothing but pure entitlement. And then the nose dropped. The sound was spectacular. It wasn't a crash so much as a heavy, earth-shaking thud followed by the sickening crunch of a radiator meeting solid clay. The rear of the Range Rover kicked up into the air like a bucking bronco, the back tires spinning helplessly in the void before gravity slammed the whole chassis down. Onto the edge of the trench, a cloud of dust and airbag powder exploded out of the open windows, and the horn blared along. Continuous wail of mechanical agony that echoed off the hills. I didn't run. I walked slowly down the driveway, sipping my coffee, Buster trotting happily at my heels. By the time I got to the trench, the horn had stopped, and Victoria was scrambling out of the passenger side door, because the driver's side was buried deep in the mud wall of the pit. She looked like a ghost, covered in white powder, her hair standing on end, her expensive blouse ruined by a spilled green smoothie that was dripping down her front. She spotted me, and the shock on her face instantly morphed into that familiar, venomous rage. She scrambled up the embankment, slipping in the dirt, losing a shoe, and pointed a shaking finger at me. "You," she screamed, her voice cracking. "You maniac. You tried to kill me. Look at my car. Look at it." I took a slow sip of coffee and looked at the SUV. It was nose down at a 45-degree angle, firmly wedged in the earth. "Well, Victoria," I drawled, "looks like you found my erosion control project. Didn't you see the road closed signs back there?" "Signs?" She shrieked. "I don't care about your signs. You dug a hole in the middle of the community access road. I'm calling the police. I'm calling the FBI. You're going to prison, Caleb Thorne." She was frantically tapping on her phone, which had a cracked screen, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. I just leaned against a fence post and waited. 20 minutes later, a sheriff's cruiser rolled up. Deputy Miller, a good man who I'd known since high school football. He stepped out, tipped his hat to me, and then looked at the Range Rover sticking out of the ground like a lawn dart. He looked at the danger sign standing 10 feet away from the rear bumper. He looked at Victoria, who was currently. Miller shook his head. "Ma'am, an HOA vote doesn't rewrite county property lines. Unless you have a deed recorded at the courthouse granting you access, you're trespassing. And right now, your vehicle is obstructing an active construction site." Victoria was sputtering, breathless, watching her power dissolve in real time. But she wasn't done. She called a tow truck, demanding the most expensive service in the county. When the driver arrived, a guy named Big Mike who drove a heavy-duty rotator. He took one look at the situation and laughed. "Lady," he said, scratching his beard, "that thing is framed out. I can't pull it backward without ripping the undercarriage off. I need a crane. That's gonna cost you about $2,000 just to show up," Victoria screamed. She actually stomped her foot like a toddler. But while she was melting down, I was playing my ace card. See, while she was harassing me all those months, I hadn't just been digging holes. I'd been digging through archives. I drove into town that afternoon while she was still arguing with the tow driver, and I met with my lawyer, a sharp woman named Elena, who handed me a folder with a smile. "You were right, Caleb," she said. "I found the original developer's agreement from 1978, back when that land was first subdivided. There's a specific covenant, signed and notarized, that explicitly forbids any access road connecting that parcel to your ranch. It was a condition of the sale to prevent livestock from getting onto the highway. Not only do they not have an easement, they are legally barred from ever asking for one." I took that document, made a copy, and laminated it. When I got back to the ranch, Victoria was still there, sitting on a stump, watching the crane operator lift her prized SUV out of the mud. It was a sorry sight, bumper hanging off, grill smashed, oil leaking from the pan. I walked up to her and handed her the laminated paper. "What is this?" She snapped, snatching it. That, I said, is a restrictive covenant from 1978. It says that your HOA, and your entire subdivision are legally prohibited from crossing my property line. It also says that any attempt to establish a road here voids the developer's liability insurance. I leaned in close. I spoke to your HOA insurance provider about an hour ago, Victoria. I sent them the photos of the crash and this document. They were very interested to hear that you've been encouraging residents to trespass on a restricted agricultural zone. They mentioned something about negligence and policy cancellation. For the first time since I'd met her, Victoria Vance was speechless. Her mouth opened and closed, but nothing came out. She looked at the document, then at her ruined car, then at me. The realization hit her like the trench wall. She hadn't just wrecked her car. She had exposed her entire HOA to a massive lawsuit and insurance fraud investigation. The fallout was swift and brutal. I filed a civil suit for property damage, the gate she broke, the fence she cut, the emotional distress. With the covenant in hand, it was an open and shut case. The judge, who apparently had a distaste for HOA letters acting like miniature governments, threw the book at her. Victoria was ordered to pay for all the repairs, plus punitive damages. But the real justice came from her own people. When the residents of Serenity Heights found out that their HOA dues were going up to cover the legal fees, and that their insurance was being audited because of Victoria's shortcut, they revolted. They held an emergency meeting, and from what I heard, it was a bloodbath. They voted her out unanimously. I heard she listed her house for sale a month later, moving back to the city where she could yell at taxi drivers instead of ranchers. The trench is still there, by the way. I filled it in partially, turned it into a nice little koi pond with some cattails and lilies. It's peaceful. Sometimes I sit out there in the evenings, watching the frogs jump in the water, and I think about boundaries. You know, people like Victoria. They think the world is just a map waiting for them to draw lines on it. They think their convenience outweighs your hard work. But the land remembers. The land has rules. And if you push the land too hard, sometimes the earth just opens up and swallows you whole. So, tell me, folks, where's your line in the sand? Have you ever had to dig a trench to keep the crazy out? Drop a comment below. I read 'em all. And if you want to see more stories about entitled neighbors hitting the wall of reality, hit that subscribe button. Until next time, keep your fences strong and your shovel handy.